everybody. Alrighty, so welcome to Tucson Zine Fest 2021's LGBTQIA plus panel. So I did disable the waiting room. Okay, just a few reminders before we get started. This is being recorded for posting to YouTube later, as well as if it's possible for you to mute yourself when other people are speaking, that'd be great, so we prevent that background noise as well. And feel free to use the chat to ask questions if there's people who want to ask questions for later on in the panel, because we will do live questions at the very, very end. Okay, so let's start with some quick introductions. If we could get each panelist to just, say your name, your pronouns, a little blurb about yourself, that would be awesome. So let's go ahead and start with Joolie, if you wouldn't mind.
Hi, I'm Joolie. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm a non-binary, bi-Dene Zinester. I'm living in UCLA, going to library school right now for grad school. And yeah, been making zines since roughly 2010. And they cover all sorts of topics of representation and the stuff I'm going through and other stuff.
Excellent, thank you. And then Charissa, you want to go ahead and start next?
Hi, I'm Charissa, and let's see, I make a lot of different zines. Some of them are fourth wave feminist based, and as well as perzines. Some of them are about my identity, some are not. I'm a queer disabled neurodivergent zine creator in Phoenix, Arizona, and I also run Wasted Ink Zine Distro and the Phoenix Zine Fest up in Phoenix. So happy to be here.
Awesome, thank you. And then Amanda?
Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Meeks. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns. I'm here in Tucson, Arizona. My zines are sometimes about mental health, my identity as a queer, non-binary person, and sometimes just random musings that I feel inspired by. I'm also a librarian, so I'm excited that there's another librarian in training on the panel. And yeah, I moved to Tucson partly to start a mobile zine library and makerspace type project. So that's what my business name is, Outspokin and Bookish. So yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Awesome, yeah. I think I just forgot to introduce myself as well, because I just introduced myself on a different panel, but I'm Elisa Mask and I am one of the co-organizers of Tucson Zine Fest, so I'm just facilitating the panel and asking questions, making sure we keep on time and all that good stuff. So we do have some prepared questions from our Instagram followers and people online, so we'll go around and give everyone a chance to answer those. But as a reminder, try to keep your answers about 3 to 5 minutes long so we can ensure that everyone does get a chance to express themselves as well. Okay, so we have our first one here is about your art and creativity process. It's what motivates you to express yourself and inspires your creativity. And let's go with Joolie first again.
It's a lot of just sort of exploring experiences that have happened to me. I talked about this in the other panel, where it's like big kind of like life events sometimes inspires me. Sometimes it's like seeing a zine that's like talking about something where I'm just like, oh, that's a thing that I've never talked about as well. Maybe I should do a zine about that. Yeah, it's just sort of exploring things that I think would be easier done through paper than me ever saying it out loud. And then being able to share those experiences with other people I made a zine that was like about, that was basically be in like a frog form, but like I hit on a bunch of things that have been kind of like weird. It'd been hard for me to sort of say out loud. So it was like anxiety issues, it was being bi, being non-binary, and like drawing all those scenarios was like very cathartic. And yeah, it just makes me realize that I'm like, okay, I know I'm really bad about talking about myself, so maybe I should just make it into a zine, so it's just easier to sort of get all these sort of thoughts out.
Cool. Yeah, and we can go in the same order with questions.
I really relate to what Joolie said just about like processing experiences and using zines as that mode of processing. And I think so often I feel like I have a story to tell, but I don't know where to put it. Like Tumblr doesn't feel right, Instagram, like it all just feels like not the right place for it. But a zine, there's always a place for my voice and my stories in zines. And so I think that for me to understand and process like what I went through as a child and a youth and in my early adulthood, it's really helped me to just write about it and collage about it and just kind of make a zine, even if it doesn't see other people. I've made a lot of zines that just sit at my house for me and that I don't print and distribute. And I think the motivation behind my work is to just have an outlet for me to process. Yeah, like whether it's traumatic experiences or just like life things that I think I would benefit from writing about. Yeah, that's the motivation behind it all. And the collaborative zines I've done is just a larger aspect of that, larger scope of that, to invite others to also have a space to process or have their voice heard and to collectively create this space where we're all happy and doing it together. So it's a little less isolating. So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And then Amanda?
Yeah, I think my motivation is pretty similar to what Charissa and Joolie have said as well. And a lot of it is about processing my own experiences through my own lens and having the space to do that, but then also being able to share it with either the community that I'm a part of or my friends or other creative people. I think that's a really important part of my process. And it's also like pretty critical to my mental health and well-being. So it's a space that I feel like is just very important to me. I've been a maker my whole life. I've also been queer my whole life. And I think that it's those two things are just very important for me to embrace and share.
Yeah, definitely. And that, you know, making zines can definitely be that like safe space, even if you don't have one in a place, you know, like Arizona or Tucson, where that kind of can be an issue sometimes. And then with our second question, our next question, it is, when did you get into zines and what interests you about zines? So let's go in the same order with Joolie first.
Yeah, zines. Again, like I said, I got into them around probably like end of high school because I was getting into comics and I was getting into like alternative sort of comics, and then a lot of those start off as zines before they're like published, and so yeah, just finding as many like bookstores and comic book stores as I could, and just like grabbing as zines that I could, even if I didn't know what was going on in them. And yeah, I think zines for sure were like the space where I was finding like much more like alternative views than like the dumb Marvel comic I read the week before. And and yeah, and it just sort of like finding people that just sort of like are having similar sort of like crises of like gender identity and sexuality, and yeah, it's just been sort of like a gathering process as much as whatever I find, I swipe up. And it's even more so online now, where I just find collections of things that, you know, I've never seen before. So yeah, sorry, my cats are fighting. I'm looking at them.
Cool. Yeah. And then next, Carissa.
Let's see. I first got interested in zines in my last semester of journalism college because I just was so opinionated, had a lot of things to say, and I felt like in the journalism world there wasn't a lot of space for my opinions to exist. And so someone suggested, like, why don't you make a zine? And I was like, whoa. And that blew my mind. And without knowing anyone else who makes zines or really even seeing a lot of them, I started my own. And then met, you know, like one other person in Phoenix that was making zines, and I like latched onto them. Her name's Mary Rose. And we've been best friends ever since. But, you know, what inspires me and what interests me about them is, you know, in my queer journey, I would say that I've come out pretty recently, like in the last few years. And so much of me being comfortable to even explore my identity, say it out loud, say it to family when it's safe to do so, and other peers has been because of zines, because I was able to read so many other stories and experiences and personal stories from other people, that I was able to feel comfortable to even think like, well, maybe there's something more to this feeling that I have. So I would say that, yeah, zines have been instrumental in my own self-exploration and feeling comfortable to come out. So I'm really grateful for them.
Cool. Yeah. And then Amanda.
Let's see. I first got into zines probably in like 2008, 2007. I was part of a book and paper making MFA program, and that was where I first really learned about kind of the artistic merit of zines. And that program was full of other queer people too. And so it was just like a natural fit with like book and paper art, of course. And I went on a kind of meandering journey through the art and library world from there, which ended up like resulting in me leaving that MFA program, going to library school, and getting involved with like small community run libraries and organizations, specifically Read Write Library in Chicago. And so I volunteered with them for several years, and they primarily collect zines about Chicago and by Chicagoans. And so, yeah, that was my main like introduction to them, and then how I really got hooked into them, as well as like a community of zine makers. And let's see, I think what interests me about them mostly is just the variety, the fact that anybody can make a zine, and you don't have to have any particular skills to do it. You don't have to have any, you know, specific, like, and you don't have to be good at drawing. You don't have to be good at writing. You don't have to be good at anything. You can just express yourself however you want. And so I just love the diversity of zines and how people express themselves.
Yeah, totally. And there's not this publisher critical lens like there is with books. You get a lot more publications through zines that you probably wouldn't see in a book. And then with our next question here, this one was suggested to us by a young person just starting out. And they say, as a youth starting out, what tools would you suggest beginners use to make zines to get started? And let's go in that same order again with Joolie first.
Yeah, like I said in the other panel before, in terms of tools, I use Procreate on my iPad. It's pretty cheap as a drawing app, much cheaper than Photoshop. Uh, but there's like a lot of drawing apps you can use to do things, and but like don't feel pressured to know how to draw to use or any of these apps. You just paste text onto onto things, and it's a zine. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of tutorials online on how to make single page zines, um, and yeah, there's like a myriad of ways of how to make zines now. That's very simple to find. You can make a zine off of just screenshots of stuff that you've drawn on, and you turn into a PDF, and now that's a zine. Yeah, I feel like you have to think. You can think more broadly about what can make up a zine, and just use whatever tools you have at hand. It's kind of whatever you can think of.
I completely agree with Joolie. Yeah, like there's so many different options now to make zines and different tools, and you can do like the cut copy paste method, where you're laying everything out by hand. You can use typewriter. You can use like any art supplies you have at your house, like newspapers. I've like photocopied some books for backgrounds and things, and also online, like there's so many programs that are available now. People have told me even recently they've made zines using Canva. They've used PowerPoint to make zines, which is amazing. There are like, fancier programs that you can make zines with online, but there's also just so many different ways to do it. And like Joolie mentioned, like there's so many tutorials online. I remember when I first started there, I was like digging through old like WordPress blogs and all this weird stuff for zines, just trying to figure out how to make a zine. But now there's so many YouTube tutorials. There's a ton of TikTok accounts. Like zines are all over the place. So looking online for those resources is really great. And on the Wasted Ink Zine Distro website, there's a community resource page with a lot of tutorials and links and like all sorts of stuff that people can learn how to make really simple stuff or like more complex book art. So there's a lot of good links there. Yeah.
Yeah, in addition, I'm gonna share something in the chat, but it's just a Google Doc that I started as part of a workshop, and a few workshops later, it has a lot of resources on it, or ideas for things that you can use to cut, collage, and make marks, which I kind of think of as the main kind of elements of zine making. And there's just so many tools, and there are so many creative ways to make a zine, like I said earlier, that I think you can use what you have. And that's kind of where I always suggest people start, is just using what you have and going from there. So if all you have is a piece of paper and a pen, like that works. But you can get into more artistic approaches. And I am currently learning how to use a risograph, and currently got a risograph as part of a grant. So I'm super excited to explore that in the upcoming months, and hopefully make it something that I can also offer to others who want to try to learn Riso and incorporate zine making.
Cool, that's awesome. Yeah, and I just think that it's amazing, like the experimentation you can do with making zines, and that's like half the fun, is just finding your own kind of style. And then when we post this video on YouTube, I'll be sure to share that link as well to the Google Doc. That's really cool. That's an awesome resource too. And then, so our next question that was prepared, let's see, is, what is your writing purpose, or what are you trying to say through making your zines? Let's go in the same order again and have Joolie start.
Yeah, so with my zines, it's generally like a big sort of thing I kind of want to get onto paper. So like I said, I made a zine that was like largely about like my anxiety, and I drew that with me as a frog doing like anxiety. But then it also had like other stuff where I was thinking about, you know, trying to tell people that I'm bi, and like in the panels, it's like this frog being like, oh, I like frogs, but I also like lizards, and and then like list off all these other sort of amphibians that they like, and then the person replying just being like, oh, but like, why don't you like frogs? And it's just like, I do like frogs. I don't know how to explain this to you. But yeah, so sort of like exploring the sort of issues that I have through like the lens of like something a little bit more comedic is what I was doing with that zine. But yeah, it's definitely like going through just sort of things that I feel like are going to be easier, or I can use comedy through a comic or something to talk about some sort of serious thing that I'm dealing with, and putting it into a zine, into something I can give to somebody who can hopefully like look at it and be like, oh, okay, I get what you're going through, or what you're talking about, and it just being like an easy thing to share with other people, rather than having to be like, hi, I'm bi, but that means that you know, this is my whole spiel about what that means.
I guess my purpose with my writing is for my own learning. So I would usually pick a topic for my collaborative zines that I needed to or wanted to learn more about, and then spend time researching it to write my articles, to really like learn as much as I could about that topic, and then publish a zine about it with all my like findings and everyone else's voices and contributions combined in there. So in 2018, you know, I published a zine about cannabis, and just to like understand more about the topic and all its uses as medicine and everything else that it's good for, like in the industry, was really great for me to learn, and then also be able to distribute in a zine for other people to learn as well. A lot has changed in the past 2 years, so now I'm doing issue 2. And again, just like doing about a year's worth of research to really understand the changes that have taken place, what's relevant, what's current, on a really large scale as well, and approaching it from a political space as well, and discussing reparations for all of the people of color that have been treated incorrectly with our justice system because of cannabis. So kind of like pulling apart all the pieces of a topic to really understand it. I really like zines that educate me on topics, so I tend to kind of lean towards making zines on anything that I kind of want to learn more about myself. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you, Charissa, that I love zines that are somewhat educational in scope. And I think my main purpose in my zines and my writing and most of my art in general is like a practice of reflection and like learning through reflection. And that's something that's that I'm constantly doing as part of my process, but then it's also there in my zines for the readers too. So a lot of my zines are kind of workbooky. I have one on like brave spaces and having difficult conversations and community. I also have one on Pluto, which is kind of a metaphor for some other things such as language and the evolution of language and like the definition of things, and which, as we know, is a very queer topic because our language and how we describe ourselves is always evolving and changing. And yeah, so that's what I would say my main purpose of my writing is.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, zines are so personal, and even if it's like an educational zine, it's like a curated educational just for the reader. Someone in the last panel said it's like reading someone's diary. So yeah, I would agree with all of those, of course. And then our next question here is, can you talk about how your work impacts your immediate or your online community? And again, let's start with Joolie.
Yeah, I think I did like a small, I'm trying to keep on top of the coming out days or like the visibility days. They always sneak up and I'm like, I was supposed to do, like, I should do a thing for this. And I'm never prepared. It's always the day of, and I either do a thing or I don't do a thing. But like the last by visibility day, I did like a short comic that I just posted like I think on Instagram and Twitter about like, oh, in case you didn't know somehow, I'm bi, and this is just me explicitly saying it because I want to just have a space that I like explicitly said this thing versus like, I don't know, it coming up in conversation. And yeah, it was really nice seeing people being like, thanks for telling me that. I didn't explicitly know that. I'm you know, I'm proud of you to just say that, and that was really cool. I should do like an actual zine about it or put that stuff that I made into a thing. But yeah, it's really interesting to like talk about yourself and then seeing people immediately react to it. And I want to do something about being non-binary, and I've talked about it a little bit in one of my zines, but it was more of like it was just me talking about growing up, having to wear dresses or finding myself in a dress repeatedly, and then having the realization that I'm like, I don't have to actually wear dresses if I don't feel comfortable in them anymore. And the sort of like revelation that I could just like throw them all away and never think about it again. And I definitely want to turn that into like a larger discussion of like my kind of journey of being non-binary over probably, I mean, because I know I've had these sort of feelings since high school. And so, so yeah, and I know that there are people who probably relate to living in a small town and trying to wrestle with your gender identity and how you represent yourself. But yeah.
I think that, well, I hope that my work, especially my more personal zines, and I guess even the collaborative ones, it makes people feel connected to one another and less alone. I think that for so long throughout my life, for a variety of reasons, I have always been a bit of a loner. And so I've always craved those connections, but had trouble keeping and making and keeping friends, or, you know, I was just moving around a lot, especially as a kid. And so I always craved those connections. And zines, I think I'm always amazed by how they can be catalysts for connection. And so I hope overall that, you know, my immediate or larger community feels connected through the zines that I make and the zines that I distribute through my distro, that it provides connection for people to feel like they're part of something bigger, and that their experience, even though it might feel like they're by themselves, it's not so much, they're not so much alone in that experience. So I hope that it does impact people that way, that it connects them and makes them feel less alone overall.
I can relate 1000% so much to that. I feel like in my practice, my most significant impact has been in my work as a librarian, where I've introduced a lot of students to zines, and they went on to like use them creatively in their classes, and then they come back and share them, and it's like such an amazing thing to witness when they get into zines. And I've worked with journalism students, I've worked with art students, and it's just and how it inspires them. I've had students email me and say, like, I was feeling really stuck on this assignment, and then I came to your workshop and learned about zines, and now I got permission to make one for my assignment for whatever it is. And yeah, that's been, I think, where I've had the most impact.
Cool, yeah. And we have a few more questions here. Again, you guys can put questions in the chat if you want them answered at the end as well. If we do run out of time, I'll just reopen the same meeting and we can all rejoin the same meeting. But our next question here is talking about, are there any artists or writers you consider to be influential or like essential zine reading? And Joolie, you can go ahead and start again.
Yeah. So last time I suggested a bunch of like places to get zines, but I actually pulled out some zines that I thought were very influential. I would say any zine or comic done by Melanie Gelman. They make some great stuff about being queer and non-binary. This one is specifically about a queer relationship. It's kind of sci-fi, definitely not safe for work. But they made a zine that I got at Denver a handful of years ago that was about being non-binary, and I flipped through that, and that was like revelatory for me to go through that and to see their experience with being non-binary. And so yeah, and I was actually able to they made a quarantine zine that was like recipes for while you're in quarantine, and I submitted a comic for that. So that was really cool to work with that. And then I would say any zine by Maya Kobabe, but specifically The Non-Binary Bunny, which is a retelling of the Runaway Bunny, but a bunny that is non-binary, and it's beautifully illustrated. And it has like all of the same sort of things. So it's them talking to their mother about what they are and how they envision themselves and stuff, and all these sort of examples of, you know, if I was a frog, I would be on land and water, which I think is so cute. And then just a throwaway suggestion would be Bowser and Luigi Are in Love. I don't think this is available anymore in printed form, but it's yeah, it's about them having a relationship together, and it's great, and I love it.
Those look amazing. I'm gonna have to look those up after this panel. I think that zine creators who are influential and essential are anyone who is a BIPOC creator or a POC creator, especially a queer trans person of color that is making zines. I think those voices are very important, and they make everyone makes zines on all sorts of different topics. So it's not like you're missing out on topics. It's just you're reading them from a different lens. And especially for white people, I think that is important to do your own reading and be intentional about who you're reading and consuming art and literature from. And so that's what I would say. I spent the last 3 years specifically focusing and reading work by queer and trans people of color. And I've learned a lot, and I've changed a lot about the way I think and the way operate and even move through the world. And I think that kind of work is really important to like decolonize and break down the systems of oppression that we all benefit from. So I would say that's what I've been reading, and I do think it's essential reading right now and always.
Yeah, I think I am influenced by a lot of artists and writers outside of the zine realm. I'm also, of course, influenced by other zine makers, and queer and trans people of color are among those as well. I think one of the most influential writers that I have learned from and done a lot of reading of is bell hooks. So both from like a creative practice and a teaching practice. She has influenced my work in so many different ways. But yeah, I find like inspiration and influence like everywhere. And yeah, it's something that I think that, like Charissa said, like just reading and consuming wherever you find inspiration is really important. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and we do have a few more questions. We have 2 more questions. So I think actually let's just go ahead and I'll restart the meeting and we can all rejoin, and that way no one will be cut off in the middle of speaking or anything like that. So just rejoin the same exact link here. All right. Okay, one weird thing of having panels online, but here we go. I think everybody's back, so excellent. Our next 2 questions, they can even be combined into one answer as well. It's the first one: in your individual experience or the experience of people around you, have you experienced gatekeeping in the zine community, and do you think it's gotten better or worse in the zine community? And how can other people encourage inclusivity in the zine community? And let's start with Joolie again.
Like I said on the other panel, I've been to a lot of Zine Fest up and down like the California coast, and the Phoenix Zine Fest, and even Tijuana Zine Fest, which was really cool. And I've luckily not experienced too much stuff from other people in terms of gatekeeping, and most of my experience with gatekeeping is within like comics, because I worked at a comic book shop, and having people be kind of weird about zines and not understanding what they are, and but that's like a whole other thing. But yeah, in terms of like, yeah, I don't think I've been very fortunate to not be embroiled in any sort of drama with the people putting together Zine Fest and stuff, and especially the Bay Area, they've always been very queer friendly, and I think if there's any gatekeeping, sometimes it's stuff that I just see on Twitter in terms of like labels and in terms that you're using describing your identity, especially around the word queer. And I think it's when you have a lot of things that are kind of wrapped up in your identity and you're trying to figure out the right words and terms for it. And you have people that are just, there's a lot of feelings behind around specifically queer as either like as a derogatory term or as a term to describe yourself. I can't say there's any good answers on it. I think it all depends on your experiences with the words and terms. And you just have to be able to explain your usage and what it means to you specifically. And yeah, I think that's kind of all I have to say about that.
So I would say I haven't experienced a whole lot of gatekeeping in the zine community. I think if anything, when I first started making zines, I brought them to like a really weird indie bookstore downtown. And they said the zine scene is dead in Arizona. No one cares about zines. But they still bought mine. And I felt like really all the zine community needed was more people organizing and more people like bringing the people who cared about zines together. And clearly, you know, that started like 7 years ago or something like that. And like the zine community in Arizona as a whole has grown so much and everyone's excited about it that we can have different fests in different cities. We can have different maker spaces and distros and libraries. Like it's all popping up now. And Arizona is kind of a destination for zines now. I'm just saying, like people come from all over the place to experience zines in Arizona, which makes my heart so happy because the zine scene is not dead anywhere. It's just underground and needs more love and care. I don't know. In the queer community, like Joolie said, I've definitely experienced gatekeeping and just weirdness that I haven't experienced at all in the zine community, in the queer community, and also the like literary arts and academia world, like lots of gatekeeping there, even within zines. So like zines in academia is this weird world that operates completely separate from just the zine community and the zine world, and trying to better understand those unwritten rules and navigate those spaces has been really interesting over the years. But I would say that all the projects that I've done and worked on and my own zines and everything that, you know, we've built has been because of the wonderful zine community in Arizona, in different states and even countries as well. I think everyone like really is happy to focus on zines and the other stuff can kind of be worked out. Everyone's just, I find, the most supportive, resource sharing, skill sharing. Like we all really work together, and that's the overall goal, in my opinion. Yeah. Should I answer the second question too?
Yeah, about inclusivity. Yeah, absolutely.
How can other people encourage inclusivity in the zine community? Just continue that like overarching goal of helping people make zines. Even yesterday in the distro, like someone was whispering to their friend in the distro, like, my zine's like not good enough to be in here. And her friend was like, you should just ask, like, just ask, you just ask. And it's like, yes, like we will continue building, we'll continue like bringing people in and like uplifting everyone, because everyone's voice belongs in zines. Like there isn't like a right way or a wrong way, or like, you know, there's just so much room for acceptance in the zine community. So I think inclusivity has to do with learning and reading different voices and learning from those voices and really understanding different people's experiences from their own perspective, unedited and uncensored. And I think that's part of the power of zines, is because they really are an opportunity for inclusivity that exists maybe outside of other systems and situations that we experience. So I think just continuing the work of bringing people in, new people making zines, even older people making zines, just like keep bringing them together, because inclusivity and learning and like breaking down of stereotypes can all happen within those spaces. I think it's really cool. Yeah.
Let me see. The first question, I have to go back to my list because yes, gatekeeping. Okay, so gatekeeping in the zine community, I think similar to what Charissa said with gatekeeping around academia, like that's probably where I've experienced the most gatekeeping, where zines are concerned, because they don't fit into traditional systems. And even the system that we had where I worked last and was developing a zine library, the system for purchasing books didn't work for purchasing zines. It was like I was speaking another language. And it was very difficult to figure out how to actually buy zines directly from either Wasted Ink zine distro or from individual zine makers on Etsy. Like, it was all very complicated, and lots of pulling teeth with the admin in my library's office. So that's probably the most gatekeeping I've experienced. There was also, there's always concern in academia about the academic merit of zines as well. And like, how do you grade them if you're using them in your classes? And of course, zines are a medium that kind of push against that idea in and of itself. And so that was always something that I would have to talk to people about when working with them and trying to incorporate zines in learning spaces. As far as gatekeeping in zine communities, I don't feel like I've experienced that very much. I think there's still room for like distros and festivals and whatnot to be more inclusive in the way that we prioritize by POC and also queer and trans voices in those spaces and in those festivals. And I think there are people that are doing that work. And of course, I know like here in Arizona, like it does seem to be a priority, but I think that we can keep working on that and keep pushing for that, and just make sure that that stays like the priority and those voices are centered.
Yeah, absolutely. All really good points. And then if anyone has any live questions, you can put those in the chat as well. But while we're waiting to see if there's live questions, I have just a few announcements about the Zine Fest in general. We have an omnibus this year with contributions from a lot of exhibitors, and that's on TucsonZineFest.com. And that after printing costs, that goes to benefit the Navajo and Hopi Families COVID-19 Relief Fund, as well as allied media projects. So really good causes to help support by buying that issue, as well as we have a shirt printed by Tan Line Printing, which is a local printing shop here in Tucson. And that was designed by Bethany Fortner, who's one of our exhibitors this year as well. And then we also have some consignment on our website as well from exhibitors from this year. So TucsonZineFest.com for all of that stuff. And when we post this up on YouTube, I am going to list some like mutual aid that's specific to Tucson. And one of those great mutual aid resources, if you're in Tucson, would be Southern Arizona Gender Alliance. They are a great resource and they help a lot of people. So they're great to donate to as well as to get news from that's specific to Arizona. Okay, I don't see any live questions in the chat, so I'm going to assume there's probably none. But, thank you everyone attending for your time. Thank you exhibitors for your contributions and for your time as well. And just awesome talk. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting and all that you've done for the Tucson Zine Fest. It's really been a great fest to participate in. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you. It's nice to hear you say that. So yeah, thanks everyone. And I'll let you guys go so I can get ready for the next panel here at 2. All right.
Bye, Joolie. Bye, Amanda.